Morning, everyone, and thanks for coming out today. Having a briefing on industrial hemp this morning, and I'm really pleased that we have Commissioner Comer here from Kentucky, Agriculture Commissioner, and Representative Massie. We're also expecting Representative Polis and possibly Representative Blumenauer later on this morning. Just wanted to start out by updating you all a little bit on the latest with hemp legislation here on Capitol Hill. As you may know, there was an amendment introduced by Representative Massie and Polis to the Farm Bill that would allow for universities to do research on industrial hemp without having to get any type of a DEA license. And that amendment passed 225 to 200 and was eventually included in the final House version of the Farm Bill that did pass. And we're very hopeful that they will go to conference with the Senate on that in the near future. So there isn't a date set yet, but if they do, we're hopeful that hemp will be included for the first time. We're very excited about this amendment because it's the first time we've had a vote on the floor, and we had very strong bipartisan support. 63 Republicans and 162 Democrats voted in favor of the bill, and we thought that was excellent in this current environment. It's always great when you can get a good bipartisan vote like that. I also want to let you know about our legislation. Representative Massie introduced a bill earlier this year, HR 525, the Industrial Hemp Farming Act here in the House, and we now have, I believe, 46 co-sponsors, is that right? Yeah, 46 co-sponsors, again, bipartisan, quite a few Republicans as well as Democrats on the bill. And we also have a companion legislation in the Senate, and that is S359. And that bill has 5 current co-sponsors, including several Republicans, Senator Paul and Senator McConnell, as well as the 2 senators from Oregon, Mr. Wyden and Merkley, and then Sanders from Vermont. So we feel like now is the time. The industrial hemp market has grown. The Hemp Industries Association put out a release this year estimating that the current U.S. market of imported hemp products is close to $500 million. And that includes auto parts, it includes textiles, it includes paper, it includes food products. We actually have someone here in the audience from the CRS. They wrote a great report on industrial hemp. If any of you here have not read that, I highly recommend you pick up a copy of that. It's got a really comprehensive background on industrial hemp and the current status. And so without further ado, I want to introduce Commissioner Comer from Kentucky. He's been a real champion for industrial hemp. He led the charge in Kentucky to get a bill passed there to legal and allow for hemp farming under state law. And he now has seen the recent memo that was put out by the Justice Department and believes that is opening the door for farmers to be able to grow hemp. And so I'll let him speak more about that. Commissioner Comer, I'd like to welcome you, please. Thanks very much for coming today.
Well, thank you all very much. I know your time is precious, so I will get straight to the reason that we're here. And I am James Comer. I'm the Commissioner of Agriculture in Kentucky. That's an elected position, the only statewide Republican office holder in Kentucky. One of the things when I was running for office that we campaigned on was industrial hemp. We worked very closely with Congressman Massie, and I can't say enough good things about Congressman Massie and Senator Paul. They've kind of held my hand through this process in Kentucky, and I just wanted to first tell you what we went through to get to this point in Kentucky. We're obviously a conservative state, and most of the states that have passed legislation pertaining to cannabis have been blue states, and we're a very red state in Kentucky. McCain won Kentucky by 20 points, and Romney won by 22 points, so we're a very red state. This issue is not a partisan issue, and we felt like this was an option for Kentucky farmers. We felt like this was an opportunity to create manufacturing jobs in Kentucky through manufacturing hemp. It's an issue that conservatives like because it's a freedom issue. It's a free market issue. It's an issue that liberals like because hemp is a green crop. If you're into sustainability, it's much more sustainable to make products using hemp than plastic and so on. So it was a good issue. we filed legislation setting up a regulatory framework in Kentucky called Senate Bill 50. When we filed that legislation, we had 4 votes in the Kentucky State Senate out of 38 state senators. And we led a statewide education effort. Senator Paul and I had a press conference at the Kentucky State Fair a few months prior to filing the legislation. But we traveled the state, the media picked up on it immediately because when we filed the bill, the governor, who's a Democrat, the president of the Kentucky State Senate, who's a Republican, the speaker of the House, of the Kentucky House, is a Democrat, and one of our congressmen in Kentucky who was a Republican. They were adamantly opposed to it. So we had bipartisan opposition from some key players in Kentucky, but we continued to fight, continued to educate people. We had a committee hearing in the Kentucky State Senate when the bill started. Congressman Massie came, as well as Congressman Yarmouth. Now, I don't know how many issues Congressman Massie and Congressman Yarmouth agree on, but that was one of them.
Too many, it's kind of scary.
Okay, well, that's good, that's great. And Senator Paul came in. So I've noticed when Senator Paul gets involved in something, there's usually a lot more press there than average. So we had we also had the former CIA director, Jim Woolsey, come in, who was CIA director under Bill Clinton. It was a very bipartisan group of people that testified. To make a long story short, the bill passed the House, the bill passed the Senate, and during that time period, we had a lot of processors come in the state that said that they were potential processors that said we would be very interested in processing hemp. David Bronner, Dr. Bronner Soap, donated $50,000 to the Kentucky Industrial Hemp Commission. So we had private sector money. Senator Paul made a donation through his RAND PAC to the Kentucky Industrial Hemp Commission. So all of the people that we've had come in to testify on the bill, to educate the public on the bill, we've flown in with private sector dollars, haven't used any tax dollars, and that's kind of our appeal, is here's an industry that we can create in Kentucky where we won't have to offer tax incentives and they're not going to have worker training and all the subsidies that a lot of industries that we have to attract to Kentucky have. So it's a good issue for Tea Party groups as well as environmental groups. So where we stand today, with the recent DOJ ruling, it's our interpretation with our legal counsel in the department that ruling pertained to cannabis. Hemp has always been banned in the United States because it is in the cannabis family. The example I like to use in Kentucky, differentiating between hemp and marijuana, is hemp and marijuana are in the two different plants in the same plant family, kind of like broccoli and cauliflower. They're two different plants in the same plant family. They somewhat resemble each other, but they really don't. And that's where hemp is. The legislation, or the ruling that DOJ came out with, pertained to states that had passed regulatory framework pertaining to cannabis. So we feel that would include hemp as well. And Senate Bill 50, which we passed in Kentucky, set up a regulatory framework for industrial hemp. Our legislation says you have to register with the Kentucky Industrial Hemp Commission. You have to grow a minimum of 5 acres, and to get the state police and some of the law enforcement on board, to have consensus in the end, you have to do a background check with the state police. The state police conduct a background check to make sure you don't have any drug problems in your background. So when you pass all that, then you can get permitted to grow industrial hemp. No farmer, I can say this, I'm a farmer, no farmer will grow a crop unless they have a market to sell it. So we've tried to position ourselves in Kentucky to be the leading state to try to get industrial hemp. And I know Colorado and many other states are trying to do the same thing. But what we're hoping to do, we have an Industrial Hemp Commission meeting Thursday. And we're going to request that our congressional leadership, Congressman Massie, Senator Paul, send a letter informing the DOJ that we intend to proceed with industrial hemp next year in 2014 growing season. We intend to try to get the processors to set up shop in our state and have the farmers plan on making preparations to grow hemp next year in 2014 unless the DOJ tells us otherwise. So that's where we are. We're taking a very proactive stance in Kentucky. We believe that this is another tool in the toolbox for farmers. We were very dependent on tobacco in Kentucky. The tobacco industry has changed, so we've been trying to replace tobacco, and I think that hemp isn't going to be the answer to all of our problems, but it's an option for our farmers. I also believe it could create two manufacturing jobs in rural communities. Everything you see back here has to be manufactured by someone. We feel there's great potential in Kentucky with industrial hemp fiber for the automotive industry. And we have Toyota and Ford have a huge presence in Kentucky. We're the 4th biggest automotive producing state in the United States. Not only do we produce a lot of vehicles in Kentucky, we produce a lot of automotive parts in Kentucky that use, if you look at what Europe's doing with BMW and Mercedes, they're using hemp fiber for the dash and the door panels and the gear panels for all of their vehicles that they manufacture in Germany. We believe that we can do that in Kentucky. So that's where we are, and I will, in my remarks there, turn it over to Congress. I'm going to introduce.
You want to take some questions real quick?
I can take some questions, or I can let you come up here. I'm sure everyone knows Congressman Massie. He is just someone that I look up to. He's doing a great job in Kentucky. He's a leader in Kentucky, a leader in Congress, and he's been just a super person to deal with on the hemp issue. And I think that together we can get a lot of things accomplished for farmers and for agriculture in Kentucky. Congressman Massie.
So as the sponsor of the standalone hemp bill and a co-sponsor of the amendment that made it through onto the farm bill, I want to talk a little bit about legislative strategy. But first of all, Commissioner Comer is a little too modest, I think. What he said in passing, but I think failed to resonate, is that he is the only statewide elected Republican in Kentucky. Like all of our other constitutional officers are Democrats, I mean the statewide Republican. So, and how did he do this? Well, he took an issue, industrial hemp, which you would think is something that nobody cares about, but actually in Kentucky, we care about our farmers and finding, like you said, a replacement crop to tobacco. I live on a tobacco farm. We don't grow tobacco there anymore. We just transferred everything into cattle. We're raising beef cattle. But my whole community is really in a depression over the loss of tobacco as a crop. So we're looking at it as an alternative crop. That's my motivation. But Commissioner Comer's a real farmer. Okay, I've kind of got a little hobby farm. He's done this for a living, and his family's done it for a living. And he's also a state legislator. So he knows how to get things done. And as Commissioner of Agriculture, he had ties into the state legislature and knew how to move the bill forward. It's really been an educational campaign in Kentucky. There's no way that some of our other legislators in Kentucky who've come out in favor of it would be in favor of it if Commissioner Comer hadn't done the heavy lifting of educating people in Kentucky about what this issue is. And that's my struggle here in the House of Representatives, is an educational campaign. If you've noticed how noisy it is on the floor of the House of Representatives, that's because we're all talking about something other than what we're voting on that day. And thank goodness. And a lot of times I'm down there talking about industrial hemp. And Commissioner Comer, he's not just proactive, he's bold in this. I mean, did you hear him? We're going to grow hemp in Kentucky in 2014. He's going to take this ruling and say this is what I believe it is. And I think we need more than a Department of Justice ruling. That will get some people over the hurdle, but as a farmer and as an entrepreneur, I want to know that there's some certainty there. So I'd like to see a congressional legislative remedy to this. So that's why I'm going to push so hard, even though there's been a ruling, and I'm very happy about the ruling. One of my assets in this battle is Stephen Johnson. He's in the back of the room with the red tie there. He worked for Congressman Ron Paul. And so this bill, H.R. 525, the industrial hemp bill, would exclude industrial hemp from the definition of controlled substance. And that was basically Ron Paul's bill. And I didn't have to do a whole lot of work to take that and offer it again. And Stephen Johnson's been helping with that effort. How many co-sponsors did Congressman Paul have?
Congressman Paul, in the end, I believe he had, was it 34?
34, 35. I think I was the 35th one, because I spent 2 months in the last Congress. I got here early to finish somebody else's term up. So I think he had 35, and 10 of those left Congress. So I started out with 25 natural co-sponsors to this, and I've accumulated 21 more just by working it every week down on the floor of the House. And it's really an educational campaign. Commissioner Comer used the example, an example of how it's cannabis grown for recreational or medicinal purposes is different. I like to say it's like mushrooms. There's a difference between a psilocybin mushroom and a portobello. And it's still legal to go buy portobellos or button mushrooms in the store. So you can use whatever analogy you want. Our federal strategy here is legislative. I've got a standalone bill. We vote on a lot of things in Congress that are pretend votes because, especially in the House of Representatives, they're messaging votes because we know they're not going to go anywhere in the Senate. And that's kind of depressing. Or sometimes we offer bills that we know won't pass this congressional session, but they might pass in the next legislative session. But there's still a reason to offer them because that's the vehicle that you accumulate co-sponsors on. And then, when you have a real bill that's going to pass, it's not a pretend vote, and it usually has to do with spending, because Congress spends money, that's what we do best, unfortunately. But if you can attach this amendment to a spending bill, that's when you can get legislative action. And that was the strategy, and I have to give credit to Congressman Polis, who I think he's the primary sponsor on the amendment. It was basically the pared down version of my standalone bill. It says just to allow research universities and to grow industrial hemp. When we offered that amendment, the leadership kind of poo-pooed it. I don't think they thought it could pass. I was pretty hopeful that it could pass. The biggest concern was getting it allowed and being germane to the bill, because the bill is about agriculture policy and the farm bill is. And the standalone bill has to do with, it was referred to judiciary and energy and commerce, which deal with drug regulations and drug laws. But this is really, it is a farm issue, it's not a drug issue. So we argued that it was germane to the farm bill, and that was the big battle, getting a vote allowed. Then the question was, should we go ahead with the vote? There was some debate as to whether it was wise to even have a vote if the vote was going to fail. But I would argue that it's always good to have a vote, even if your vote fails, because then you know who to go lobby. You can talk to a bunch of people, and Commissioner Comer knows this for a fact. They'll say they're for your issue, but then they can really let you down when it comes time for a vote. And until you vote, you really don't know if they're for your issue. And so in Kentucky, fortunately, most of our federal delegation voted for this amendment, I think all but one. So that was very exciting for us. So we were glad to get a vote. It did pass. I think there were people on the floor, as I was going around during the vote whipping it, that spontaneously decided to vote for it. I had lobbied them to get onto the standalone bill. They weren't ready to be a co-sponsor of that, but it was easier to sell it as an amendment, as a pared down thing. And then there were people after the vote that came up to me and said, "Why didn't you talk to me? I would have voted for that. I didn't know it was going to pass." So people vote for different reasons, but I think if you had to vote again, I bet we get 10 or 20 more people, especially Republicans, to vote for it now that they know it's going to pass. Now it's on the Farm Bill. The question is, how is this all going to get conferenced with the Senate? There's no equivalent thing in the Senate. They did try to offer an amendment that was the full-blown hemp bill for all farmers. In the Senate side, they didn't succeed there. So there's no companion amendment on the Senate version. But we do have Senator McConnell, who's from Kentucky, and because Commissioner Comer's done such an educational campaign in Kentucky, it's such a popular issue, Senator McConnell can be all for industrial hemp, and he is. And I'm hopeful that when it gets conferenced with the Senate, that will be allowed and they'll survive that. So that's kind of the legislative update. We're still working on the standalone bill, which would be monumental. And we have 46 co-sponsors on that. We seem to get about one every week. And we've got a lot of Republicans on it too. So I'll leave it at that. I know Representative Blumenauer and Representative Polis are going to try and make it today. Who's going to speak next, Stephen, or do you want to take questions?
I believe Representative Polis should be on.
If the two of you would like to take questions.
Okay, we can do that. As you can imagine, we've got a few other things brewing today in Congress. It's a little bit hard to get all the members over here today, but I know Earl Blumenauer said he would try and make it yesterday when I talked to him. And we can take questions now if you all have questions. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I represent law enforcement in Congress who are opposed to the drug prohibition in general. I'm curious, did my colleagues in Kentucky ever come on board with agreeing to be trained to differentiate between industrial hemp, marijuana, and that law enforcement issue?
Well,
Are they still being muffin heads?
The press wrote about the hemp legislation more than any other bill. It shouldn't have been the leading media magnet bill, but it was because there was opposition to it. And the state police commissioner in Kentucky was adamantly opposed to it. A lot of the state police, rank and file, a lot of rural sheriffs, they would come up to me and say, we don't have a problem with it. We understand that you're trying to create jobs. We understand the difference between hemp and marijuana. But I think on with the police commissioner, it had a lot to do with federal funding for marijuana eradication, which is a big industry in certain parts of Kentucky. And, you know, I'm not in favor of legalizing marijuana. And part of the problem in Kentucky through the years, the people that had pushed for legalization of hemp were also the same ones pushing for legalization of marijuana. From the beginning, we differentiated hemp from marijuana. That was the first step. And we sold it as a jobs-creating bill. The Kentucky Chamber of Commerce came out and endorsed the bill. We worked with Tea Party groups, but it wasn't just because this is a 10th Amendment thing or this is our freedom or whatever. We sold it as a job creation bill and something to help farmers. So there was, to answer your question, there was opposition from the state police commissioner. The Kentucky Sheriff's Association voted to not take a position on it in their meeting. So there was some opposition, but I think as the debate went on, more and more people realized that it wasn't anything about trying to legalize marijuana or anything like that. It was a sincere effort to try to create jobs and help farmers.
I think I was there for part of the debate when we testified in the Kentucky legislature. Senator Paul came to Kentucky and I came, and so did John Yarmouth and the former CIA director. And that was part of the sell or the heavy lifting that Commissioner Comer did was, look, when you raised tobacco in Kentucky, you didn't just go out and say, put some tobacco plants in the ground and raise it and then go sell it. In fact, it was illegal to do that. It was regulated to a high degree in Kentucky, and still is. There's a lot of involvement in farm agencies. And that's what Commissioner Comer's proposed, and that assuages, for industrial hemp, assuages some of the fears. Look, it has to be what, 10 acres or more?
5 acres.
5.
Got amended down. The original bill said 10, but it ended up 5.
Okay, so 5 acres or more, and it's going to be GPS, coordinates.
Right.
They'll have it on file, just like they do when you grow corn or tobacco or anything else in Kentucky. The farm office knows where it's at. So you can't just say you have like a quarter-acre plot of cannabis and say, I was experimenting with some hemp here. And it turned out bad.
And let me say this, we have an 18-member Kentucky Industrial Hemp Commission. Law enforcement has 3 seats at the table. We have the state police commissioner is a voting member, the head of the Kentucky Chiefs of Police, and the head of the Kentucky Sheriff's Association. So they have 3 seats at the table. We want to work with law enforcement on this because you cannot grow it if, hopefully when the universities start researching it, we can prove that. You cannot grow a marijuana plant in with industrial hemp. It cross-pollinates and dilutes the THC. And we appreciate and support fully Congressman Massie's standalone bill. That would be the best way to end this all at once, completely change the definition, amend the Controlled Substances Act. We support the amendment on the farm bill to do research. We have 2 universities in Kentucky that really want to do research on this, so that would be good for our state. But we do believe that the DOJ ruling does open the door to allow us to grow it. So we'll see what happens.
Just a quick comment on the DOJ. They actually lobbied against the amendment. There were only about 48 hours between when the amendment was allowed by the Rules Committee and when we actually voted on it. So it's a very short, intense period of time in which to lobby. The staff of the executive or judicial branch are not supposed to lobby Congress, but somebody from the DOJ took it upon themselves to blast us with an email and promptly retracted when they got their fingers slapped for doing that. So, you know, this must have come from the top down, the ruling, because from the bottoms up, there was a little bit of an effort against the hemp amendment to the Farm Bill from the DOJ.
And I will add that if the DOJ allows Washington and Colorado to be able to proceed because they passed regulatory framework, we feel like every state should be treated fairly and treated the same because it does pertain to cannabis, and we have set up a regulatory framework as well. So that's our message. We want every state to be treated the same, equally.
I have a question about, thank you so much for coming and for talking about this. As far as if Kentucky farmers wanted to grow, where would they get the seed? And would that be certified by a certain agency? Would you be certifying that?
That's a good question. The seed's gonna be hard to come by the first year. In fact, we have a company in Kentucky, Caudill Seed in Louisville. They have operations in Louisville, Moorhead, and in Winchester, Kentucky. They want to be in the hemp certified seed business. So they do this with fescue, with clover, with certain seeds that are native to Kentucky. They contract with farmers to grow it just to get the seed to certify it. So our indications have been that it's going to be in short supply, the seed for Kentucky. So it's, you know, this is an emerging industry. It's currently not legal in the United States, even though we import a whole lot of it. So this isn't going to have a huge impact the first year. You have to look ahead, in my opinion, and think 10 years down the road, because I do believe the automotive industry will use it in the United States. They're not using any of it now, but I think 10 years down the road they will. I think we'll see more paper being manufactured from hemp instead of trees. I think you'll see more and more products in the health food industry come from hemp seed. So in Kentucky, we have a lot of interest for processors wanting to use it for animal bedding. We have a big horse steak, big thoroughbred industry, a lot of horses, a lot of poultry, where you have bedding in those poultry houses. So the top two agriculture crops in Kentucky are poultry and horses. So we're a unique state, and they require a lot of bedding, and it's going to be more economically viable to use hemp bedding than wheat or sawdust from lumber mills.
During your educational campaign, have you found a lot of farmers coming to you saying they're eager to
Yes.
grow? There's a lot of land that's ready to
A lot.
be used.
We won't have any trouble getting farmers to grow it. Sometimes I worry there are too many.
Yeah.
that want to grow it.
Well, the other thing you hear in Kentucky was one of the biggest producers of hemp during World War II. And you'll hear them say, well, my grandfather grew that.
Yeah.
We grew it right over here in this field.
Right.
Or it's still up on Hemp Ridge growing there wild, which it does grow wild in Kentucky in places.
They grew hemp during the war for rope. Kentucky made all the rope, and they grew the certified seed to plant the hemp for the rope for the war.
So some of these socially conservative farmers have been farming long enough, their families have, that they know that this is,
Right.
it's a crop that could produce money for the farms. By the way, it's not like the replacement for tobacco. Tobacco you can grow, one farm could grow 10 acres of tobacco and make your tractor payment, your farm payment, because it was very labor intensive. And this is going to be a different animal. You're going to have to grow more of it because it's going to be less labor intensive, which is not a bad thing. And it's going to take more acreage to get the same amount of dollars from it. But the health benefits of hemp outweigh the health benefits of tobacco.
Grant Smith from the Drug Policy Alliance. In looking at the regulatory framework in the state of Kentucky, in terms of law enforcement's ability to distinguish between marijuana and plants, do you have a sense of how that might look in terms of training for law enforcement? Or?
Yes, I failed to mention this. With the regulatory framework, we will do the testing. If law enforcement wants to go out and get some plants to do some testing, some leaves, we have the equipment. We're a big regulatory agency anyway. We test fuel, we do a lot of things. So we already had the equipment to be able to test the leaves. We could, for $21, test the THC in the leaves. If it's hemp, it will only have trace amounts of THC. If it's marijuana, it would have between 15% and 40% for the medical marijuana in California, THC.
I'll introduce our next speaker here, Jared Polis. He and I agree on a lot of issues as well. This is the bipartisan contingent here. In fact, he was the sponsor, the primary sponsor of the Industrial Hemp Amendment on the Farm Bill. So, and he does a lot of good work in Congress. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Jared.
Thank you. Which hopefully, I don't know if you all talked about that, but being in conference now, it is important to try to get the language that the House passed in the final Farm Bill, at least two reasons. One, obviously, on its own, it does allow the universities to do the research that's needed. This is a crop where, I mean, you can imagine what would happen if we froze our technology for corn and wheat and everything where they were in the 1940s. We'd be nowhere near production levels we were today. So, I mean, this is a crop where our production technology is kind of frozen in the 40s or 50s, and we have there's going to be a lot of great efficiency gains very quickly. They're all hanging fruit, but our universities want to try. And secondly, I think it also just symbolically kind of moves forward with embracing the potential for industrial hemp production. When I came in, I saw that the commissioner was discussing their ability to detect the differences between marijuana and industrial hemp. And, you know, I come from a state that has a unique perspective because it actually legalized both. But they're both contemplated entirely differently under the law. So when you talk about marijuana, which is legal in Colorado, it's very, very tightly controlled. If you're an individual, you can only raise 5 plants. If you are a production facility, there are all kinds of requirements around, you know, not having, you know, not allowing minors in, and having cameras, and having inspectors come on a regular basis. It's analogous to, you know, any kind of drug facility that might handle prescription drugs or something like that. Very, very tightly controlled. We also legalize industrial hemp, and that is treated essentially like other crops. There's not this, you know, worry about the supply chain or miners or anything else. It's just dealt with much more analogous to how we would deal with other industrial crops in our state. And farmers have begun to embrace those opportunities. We also have some news, of course, from the Justice Department where they announced that they won't interfere with states that choose to regulate marijuana, like my state of Colorado, as long as the state laws don't conflict with federal enforcement priorities, and they spelled out 8 of those that our state is fully on board with. And industrial hemp doesn't even bear a mention because it's not even on the federal enforcement radar. We've seen no reason to believe or evidence that there's any interest federally in going after states or industrial hemp producers, and the risk of federal involvement is minimal. Now, minimal sometimes isn't good enough for some folks, and that's why we do want to gather support for the Industrial Hemp Farming Act, of course, because you never want to, you know, if a regional district attorney or the attorney general, you know, wakes up on the wrong side of the bed one day or just loses their sanity and decides to go after industrial hemp. You don't want them to be able to do that. But we do want to pass the Industrial Hemp Farming Act. But in the meantime, my colleagues and I appreciate Representative Massie's leadership on this issue, are working to address the state-federal discrepancies, both administratively and legislatively. So that's where we are. I hope that the presentation, I wish I could have joined it as well. I had an earlier engagement, and I'll be happy to take any questions as well.
So you'll be kind of our canary. If they come after you, Certainly they'll come after you before they come after Kentucky if they wake up on the wrong side of the bed.
Yeah, well, and they come after the marijuana before the hemp, I would think. I mean, so, and we got a very clear go-ahead on the marijuana, again, with tight controls. But a very clear go-ahead, and, enforcement priorities that are very consistent with ours in Colorado in terms of keeping the criminal element out, keeping it out of the hands of minors, and it's hands-off on that, and there's been not even murmurs on the, on the hemp side, no real concerns.
Representative Polis or Massie, one of you, have either of you written to the Department of Justice asking about what the situation is with hemp with regards to this new memo that's come out?
I have not. Again, it's so far below. I mean, our concerns in Colorado and Washington, and to a lesser extent the medicinal marijuana states, have been about marijuana. There has been no enforcement action that I'm aware of anywhere on the industrial hemp side. So it doesn't even rise to the level where we're worried about federal action at this point, unless it was by mistake because they didn't know the difference or something.
I like Commissioner Comer's approach of the assumptive close, where you just send them a letter and say, look, we assume this, and in 2014 we're going to be spring crop, we're going to be growing industrial hemp in Kentucky. And then if they have an objection, hopefully at that time we'll hear. And by the way, just a little bit on legislative strategy, I think it was right to have a Democrat primary sponsor on the industrial hemp amendment. Because if you notice, the Republican amendments to Republican bills often fail because they don't draw Democrat support. And the Republicans, if it's their bill, they think it's great as it came out of committee. It doesn't need any fixing. So the strategy here of having a Democrat support be the primary sponsor on the amendment, I think was great, and that was brilliant on Jared's part. And then for a standalone bill, I think it does make sense to have a Republican because it's a heavier lift on the Republican side with the social moray associated with cannabis. And so that's why I'm the sponsor of it. And I think 2/3 of our sponsors right now are probably Democrat. And we try to bring on at least one Republican for every 2 Democrats we get. But hopefully we'll even that out some. But
And I think the test vote on the amendment was a good test vote for the level of support on this. At least everybody who voted for that, which was a strong majority of Congress, is at least open to, and I think we can get to the point where they would support the hemp farming bill.
The commissioner from Kentucky, the gentleman, was saying that he had a heavy lift in the beginning to educate the people in Frankfurt, and eventually was able to do that. Are there any plans or possibilities of having a hearing here in the House Ag Committee to educate members of Congress to continue this momentum y'all have built up already?
I think it would be very valuable. I think educating the Ag Committee members, I was pleased to see, and we didn't know this until the moment it occurred, but the ranking member, Colin Peterson, did support the amendment and actually spoke in favor of it on the floor of the House. And I think that there's increasing interest. And it needs to come from the, from the grassroots, from the bottom up. I mean, I think that members on that committee, who generally represent agricultural areas, need to hear from farmers and producers in their areas and say, hey, this is a crop we're looking into. This is something I think we need to know more about, just to get it on their radar.
yeah, if I got as many calls on hemp in a month as we did on Syria in a day,
It'd be done.
this thing would be packed. But yeah, unfortunately, the chairman right now, and I think maybe it's just a matter of time, but the chairman of the Ag Commission is not for industrial hemp. Their official position on the amendment was to vote against it. That was the advisement they sent to Republican members. But we prevailed in spite of that, and I think really leadership and the chairman's job is to represent the will of the majority of the members. So it's going to take, and that's actually what the speaker told me, is it's my job to bring the members along on this issue, and when they are there, then perhaps we can get a vote on the standalone bill.
And I do think that's why it's particularly important to get the right language in this farm bill. So it's the first success going forward. It'll show the research being done will help then in turn create experts who can testify, et cetera. And that's exactly what kind of needs to occur.
All right, well, if there aren't any other questions, I want to thank everybody so much for coming out today and being here. And please make sure to pick up some of the samples that are at the table on the way out. And there's also a cover copy of the CRS report and a few other documents that you might find of interest about industrial hemp, including a letter from the California Sheriff's Association who supports hemp. So thanks again for coming, everyone.